Hello, everyone. Good morning, good evening. Welcome back. Welcome to Cloud and DevOps Batch 58. So, before I start the session, I just want to give a quick recap on what's being covered in the previous session. So, previous session, we created the entire stack of Terraform, the Kubernetes cluster EKS using Terraform. Okay, so we created these things with scratch. And at the same time, we saw that unless until if you want to enable any add-on, then you need to end up using this kind of a policy, this kind of add-on. We have enabled the VPC CNI. CNI, AWS VPC CNI is the container networking interface or the networking solution that's offered on Kubernetes AKS. Along with this, we also have other add-ons called as vWorks, Calico. Okay, if you want, you can, but these are third party. Again, just before coming to the session, I just triggered this script. Okay, should be able to connect alias, right? So KC get pods. Okay, KC get nodes. KC top pods. There are no pods, I know that. KC top nodes. Okay, since we have the metric server installed, we should get the information about it as well. So before I proceed further, anyone has any sort of questions? Want to take a pause? Okay, so yesterday we were talking about when we are deploying something, we got some things called as service account, cluster role binding. We see this. What are these things? Let's try to understand. Okay, so in any text, any roadmap, you go here. If you're talking about this, they are talking something about the role-based access control when you're talking about the context of security. If you're talking about the security aspect, there is something called as a RBAC. RBAC stands for role-based access control. That means based on what you're supposed to do within the organization or as a part of the team, what roles are needed, what permissions are needed. Okay, so it's just like if an AWS instance, for example, let's understand if an instance wants permission, what we are doing, you are creating an IAM role, and for this IAM role, okay, attaching the permissions like administrator permission or compute permission or the storage permission, okay, and then you're attaching this particular role to the machine. Okay, then instance will get all the permission. Okay, this is what is happening, right? So the same thing goes with here as well. So let's try to talk about it. What exactly is the task? Let's try to understand it. So role-based access control is a method of controlling access to Kubernetes resources based on the roles assigned to the groups. Okay, just like in a Linux machine, how users are created and how based on what roles that we have given to the groups that a user is being a part of, whether he gets sudo access or not, whether he get disk adding permission or not, we are controlling it through groups, right? Where we are adding the needed permissions, right? Likewise, in Kubernetes also, you can create the user accounts. Okay, so you can create the user accounts and you can also create the groups. Okay, so RBAC involves, for example, I have a test user. I want to make sure test user can just read the pods. And apart from that, he cannot list the pods or he cannot list the nodes or he cannot list the secrets. So how can we do that? Okay, so RBAC involves creating roles and binding them to the users. Okay, so creating a role, okay, and then creating a role also means what permissions are you are adding it. Binding means what role you are adding it to which user. That means clubbing it, adding a group, adding a user to a group is called as a binding a user to the group. Okay, roles are defined. Roles are defined as a set of rules that determine what action can be performed on a specific resource. That means Manoj should be able to read the pods, write the pods, or list the nodes. But Girisha shouldn't be able to read the pods and list the pods, but she can list the nodes. Okay, I can control that. Okay, role-based access is very, 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 very important. Okay, let's try to go with the RBAC official documentation. So what it says, so role-based access control good practices. RBAC is a key security control to ensure that cluster users and workloads have only access to the resources that are needed to execute the rules. An engineer who is an administrator doesn't need to have the whole cluster permission. An engineer who is an operator doesn't need to have all the permission. An SRE who is responsible for ensuring the reliability of the site is not really responsible for having some other permissions. Okay, so role-based access control is a very important thing. Let's talk about it. Or back. All right. This is a very, very, very important thing to know. What are the rules of best practices? Ideally, you are supposed to give only the rules that are needed. Okay, that is one very important thing that it talks about. Okay, so it also says, what is that? So it is important to ensure that when designing the permissions for cluster users, the cluster administrator understand the areas where privilege escalation could occur to reduce the risk of excessive access leading to security incidents. And if it is not really needed to give you administrator permission, why do I need to give? That is a very important thing. Least privilege principle. Okay, it goes by zero trust policy. That means why should I believe everyone in the organization? Okay, based on what you do in the organization, I'll only give those rules, not everything. RBAC ensures, okay, you get the roles that are nodded in the cluster. And for this, roles are available in the cluster. Okay, and if you want to know what are the default roles that are available, okay, okay, so what are the default roles that are available in the cluster? Okay, so if you want to do that, kube control, get roles. And if you look at this, in my current namespace, which is nothing but the default namespace, there are no roles involved. Okay, if you just put -a, that means across all the namespaces that are available, it makes a search. That means in the in the in the cube system namespace, in the cube public namespace, in the cube system namespace, in the cube public namespace, and the default namespace, it does a search. Should be able to see. Can you see this in the cube public? Okay, there is a role whose name is controller. This is there, which is created here, and there are also some other roles that are there. And if you want to see what this particular role is doing, cube controller describe the role. Okay, -n. You can see. So this is the name of the role, and what this role does for config maps. Okay, he can. Okay, this anyone this role has these permissions. Config maps. Okay, so it's not just for one resource. You can also control only for this particular config map. He should be having permission. Config maps, he can create list watch. Events, he can create an event. Okay, config maps, he can get list and watch. Okay, in only the VPC CNI. And if you look at this deployments, he can get list, but he cannot create the stateful set or a controller. Okay, these are the things that are available. You can also create a role for users. Okay, so we can create users. Okay, points to be noted. Just like on Linux, how you create users and delegate needed permissions. We can also do the same thing on Kubernetes. Okay, and at the same time, you can create your own rules, perform binding, means adding user to the group role. Okay, this is called as a cluster role binding or a role binding. In AWS, who logged into the account can be given, okay, rather than creating the user on EKS. Typically, how it works is, uh, okay, in AWS, okay, I have signed in with my account. In your organization, you will also be signed in with your own account, right? Users who logged into the account can be given access rather than creating the user accounts on EKS. In reality, no one goes and creates the accounts on Kubernetes because you are going to integrate your cluster with AWS authentication using OIDC, OpenID connector. Where is EKS? Let me show you that. These are the insights of it. The moment you join in the organization, you would be having this already. So there is something called as authentication access. Yeah, go here. You can see OIDC, Open ID connectivity provider. So what you can do is you can also integrate it with your Active Directory. For example, if in your organization, if there is an Active Directory, that means just like how you sign into your AWS account, just like how you sign into your HR portal, like that. Okay, you can also integrate your Active Directory to this. That way, you really don't have to create users and manage groups. Okay, that is something which is commonly, but natively, okay, just like how to create a user, for example, if you are a conventional Kubernetes cluster, if you are running it on-prem, how do you manage it? Okay, but keep in mind we do not have any OIDC provider uh, configured in place. But if you want to know more about what is OIDC, where can I find it? Hmm. I can just select this info. AWS EK supports OpenID Connect. Okay, remember this point. Okay, this you hear it multiple times. Uh, OIDC compatible identity providers such as IAM. You can also integrate with IAM. Or OIDC is a thin layer that sits on the top of OAuth 2, which is a protocol that adds login and profile information about the identity who is logged in. With OIDC, you can manage access to your cluster by using standard procedures in your organization, just like your Active Directory. Okay, so Amazon EKS supports a single OIDC provider. Okay, Kubernetes does not provide a OpenID connectivity out of the box. Okay, you can use existing public ID connectivity provider, or you can integrate with things of your choice. Okay, so in case if you join the organization, hey, no one has created how you got this. This is you are going to integrate your Active Directory. But if you're not on AWS and if you're using on-prem, okay, for there is something called a DEX or a deck. Yeah. So this is another solution, Kubernetes authentication through DEX. So this is typically okay used for enabling authentication on your Kubernetes environment if your Kubernetes cluster is a on-prem based environment. Okay, but if you are on-prem, this could be mostly used. But if you are on AWS EKS, you integrate it with your OIDC through Active Directory. Okay, in AWS perspective, we can use AWS Access. We'll see how users can be created, how roles can be created, how can we control who can do what in a Kubernetes native way. For example, if you are preparing for any exam for Kubernetes also, this is a prominent. Okay, for now, we'll forget about all this because in the backend, in your organization, you'll be having an Active Directory where things will be associated. But on a raw, on Kubernetes, how do you handle it is something we'll see. Okay. All right. And also keep in mind, Kubernetes uses authorization, not just not authentication. Okay, authentication means username and password. Okay, Kubernetes uses authorization. So that means in authentication, you need to present yourself by using your username and password to prove who you are. Once you are proved, based on which group you are assigned with, you'll get the required authorities. That means a username and password comes up into picture. But Kubernetes, it's not like that. Okay. If you see this, did I connect? So anytime did I enter any sort of username and password? No, right? All I did is update kubeconfig. So yeah, I'm running this command. Okay, I'm not presenting any username and password, right? It is connecting to the cluster and it is generating the token based on what roles I have. I'm just connecting to it. That's it. Okay, and if you see this, I already told you in the beginning, it's going to generate a kube config file. Okay, so if you say this is the token, and this command is generating the token, and using this token we are authorizing ourselves. Okay, this user is this and this guy can do this. Okay, so keep in mind Kubernetes uses authorization, not authentication. This means there won't be any username and password, instead a token that tells the roles that this token is supposed to. Okay, AWS also have an authorization. We are adding IAM roles to the workstation. Okay, a classic example of it is an AWS instance talking to the cloud without the need of username and password by attaching the IAM role, right? So in K8s, if we create a user, okay, that means if we create a user, he don't present himself with username and password. Instead, a token. Okay, so if we create a user and those users, okay, and those users will be authorizing use something called as service accounts. Okay, if we create a user, so let me try to show you what is a service account in Kubernetes. So a service account is a non-human identity that allows applications to run workloads in a cluster. Okay. So for example, if you want to control the workloads that are running on the pod to have some particular permissions to the resources in the Kubernetes, you need service accounts. Okay. Service accounts provide a distinct identity for application components. Okay. So, so let's try to deal it. Okay. Now, if you see this kube control get SA, there is only one service account and which is created 39 minutes back. Correct. Now, what I'll do is every namespace will have a default service account. So what I'll do is I'll just try to create a service account. Okay. Using service account, we deal something interesting. Okay. I don't know what is the code of it. Some kube control create namespace sample. Okay. So I'm gonna just create a namespace, and once the namespace is created, I'll okay. Let me show you. Let me publish the code. Done. Bash. Hmm. API version command not found. Ah, okay, all right. So what I would like to do is let's create a service accounts. Now, if you see a service account will be created, KC get SA. Okay, so service accounts, just like how, remember this, just like how we use IAM roles, okay, just service accounts. just like how we use IAM role to gain access to a non-human resource on AWS. Similarly, we use service account on on Kubernetes to let needed roles aligned to the K8 workloads, like your pods. Okay, for example, if your pod want to talk to a secret which is available on the cluster, so this should be having a permission, right? Okay, so that's when it comes up. Now you created a service account. Now how do you come to know, okay, what token it is using? Technically there should be some token which will be generating, which will be temporary, right? So keep control describe as a see, if you want to know how that works, definitely there should be some reason, right? If you see this, the default service account cube control describe as a cube control describe as a default. If you see this, there will be some token associated with this. Okay, so here if you see this, there is no token associated because you just created the service account but have not assigned any roles to it. Okay, it's just like you created a role without giving any permission. Now I'll create a role and I'll create a permission to it. Now you can also see cube control describe. We have one more service account, right? Sample. Even here it's the same. There is no token associated with this, right? If you look at this, there is no token for this associated. Okay, because unless until you assign some roles, it won't be having. But you can also generate a token and can assign this. Okay, so how can you create a token? Cube control, create token. Okay, so each and every essay will have a token. If that's not available, we can generate a token and associate. So it's gonna generate a token. Just put this handy. There is the token. Done. It's pretty big one, by the way. 4 lines or 3 lines. Okay. Now what I'm gonna do is using this token, we can authenticate to Kubernetes cluster. Okay. So using the above token, okay, we will connect to the cluster. Okay. Let's create user account on Kubernetes on workstation on your Linux machine. Again, I'm using Mac. I can do it from my computer, local terminal. It will be easy. Now, what I'm going to do is we have the token handy, right? Now, sudo user add test user. Okay. Now, sudo su hyphen test user. Now, if you try to run cube control get nodes, what will be his response? Can anyone tell me? What will be his response? Anyone? Anyone? What will be his response? Anyone? Anyone? Can anyone tell me? See, as an EC2 user, if I run the cube control commands, it will work. But as a test user, if I run, will it work or not? Anyone? Anyone? Kirisha, Mrudula, Srilata, Ambit, Harish, Mahendra, Rachit,
No,
Shailaja,
it won't.
Sridevi.
It won't get the output, sir,
Why?
because the user is not under
The user is not
we are
under?
not giving the No. We are not giving the access to run the Kubernetes commands.
As simple as that. Okay, you are almost right, but the answer should be this. Okay, this guy is able to connect because this guy has a kubeconfig file. Agree? Agree?
Yes, sir.
Now, if you switch to this guy, does this guy have it? Now let's try to create
No.
mkdir dot cube. Okay. Now, if you try to copy that guy's identity, just like taking his token and passing it here, it will work, but that's not the reality, right? So what I am gonna do is, we have generated a token, right? So we'll do something, we'll copy this. Okay, but we don't use the token, just for reference we'll take. Okay, we'll copy this, we'll create our own config file. Okay. Okay, this is how it is. And if you look at this, his guy is running whenever you run any sort of kube control command. Okay, when it is connecting to Kubernetes, it is running a command which is using AWS by supplying these arguments. What it is saying, AWS, okay, region, connect to this, EKS. It's telling go and get the token. Remember this, this means you're running an AWS command to connect to this particular cluster, which is nothing but your B58 EKS, which is available in the US East 1 region, and you're asking to generate a token, and which is nothing but this particular token. Right. Now, what I would like to do is, okay, I do not want, okay, so this is not really the token, this is the certificate authority. I was mistaken. So every time you try to connect to the cluster, and if the kube config file is not available, keep this point in mind. Whenever your kube config file is not available, it is going to run this AWS command. Okay, whenever you generate the kube config, in the backend, it is running this command that is generating the whole thing. Okay. Now, what I want to do is I really don't want to run this particular command. Okay. I don't want to run this particular command for this particular user. Okay. So cluster details, okay, cluster auth and cluster name, everything remains the same. But I'll be using the token that I have generated. Okay. For example, if you try to say kube control get nodes, it will not work because you don't have the permission. Remember this. Okay. It says you cannot. Okay, because you don't know whom to connect first thing. Okay, now what I'm gonna do is I'll be supplying the token that I have generated. Okay, so let's try to see Kubernetes config file with with token, something like that. So if you look at this, everything remains the same. You have to use something called as user and token. Okay, done. User. Underneath this, I need to use the token. Users name user token. So you need to supply the token. Get this token and supply it here. Okay. Now you generated a token in the system for a service account. That means you're trying to connect to the Kubernetes cluster using a service account. Just like how we are connecting to the Kubernetes cluster by attaching an IAM role, just like that, we are connecting to the Kubernetes cluster using a service account. Okay. Now, what I'm going to do is I'll just copy this. I'll type vim.cube. Okay, we created the directory config. Now, earlier what response you got? Okay, it says it cannot connect because you don't know whom to connect. Now you have given the cluster details and at the same time you have presented the token. Now see what it says. Please enter your username. Okay. Now, why it is even asking? It should not ask, right? What is the concept of username here? Oh, I need to present some space. My bad. Okay, now this will work. Sample. what it says. Guys, so what was the earlier error? Earlier error is it cannot even connect to the cluster because there is no kubeconfig file. Now I copied the kubeconfig file with the token that I have generated on the cluster. Now I'm trying to connect to the cluster. Now what it means? Can anyone tell me? Now if I ask you, can I connect to the cluster? What will be your answer? I'm able to connect to the cluster, but I do not have the permission to generate. So what does this mean? Can you see this, guys? The system service account default sample. Earlier, we are using system user, okay, and username. Now we are using a service account. Okay, so we are using a token generated on the system, and using this, we are attempting to connect to the cluster. Okay. If you see this, you try to get the notes, what will be your answer? Okay. All right. So this means, can anyone tell me what does this mean? Anyone? Who can answer? Who can answer? Who can answer? Anyone interested to answer? Rachit, Vikram, why you're not getting the response though I supplied the token? Anyone?
So the test user we are not adding to the Kubernetes user, sir.
We
Maybe
added.
the access is not getting.
Exactly. Access, authorization. See, we are connecting using this same token, sample token, but the token doesn't have permission, that the service account doesn't have any sort of permission, right? Now you're able to connect now to the EKS, but you don't have the authorization. Now, if we align the needed roles to the service account, then this guy will get the needed power, just like how you add policies to the created role. So we need to create a role. You control, create role, something like that. Create create a role, Kubernetes something. Yeah, kube control create role is a command. Again, roles are of two types. Remember this. Roles in Kubernetes are of two types. Roles, scope is namespace. That means you create a namespace, and that's limited only to the namespace, like pod, config map, deployment. Next is cluster role. If you want someone to give access to the whole cluster, okay, scope is entire cluster. You can give access to upsize to create cluster roles, change cluster policies, and it's scoped to the entire cluster. Okay, do you remember this? So you have resources, namespace resources plus cluster-based resources, right? Just like that, you can create a role at namespace level or cluster role level. So you can create using this. But again, I hate this. If you look at this, you are creating a role whose name is who, verb. What all actions you are giving, get, list, watch, on what resources, pods, and pod status. Okay. So I just want to go imperative declarative approach. Uh, 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 uh. Yeah. If you look at this, creating a role. Okay. Now you're gonna create the role, and the role I would like to create it is just NS reader. Okay. This role that you're creating is just namespace read. Okay. Or okay, maybe what I can do is just pods. Okay. So just a namespace, just a pods. Okay. Now, if you see this, cube control, get nodes, right? Get pods. Now he can't even get list the pods, right? Now what I'm doing is, so I'm creating a resource namespace. I'm creating a role in namespace, a default whose name is this. Okay, namespace read only. Okay, namespace read only role. Namespace read only role on you are creating for whom? I'm creating for pods, or you can create for config map. You can create for this. All right. Now get list. Okay. So watch or list, you really don't see much difference. Okay. So get and list for the pods. Okay. This role, whoever uses this role in the entire namespace, which is nothing but default, they can read the pods, they can get and they can list. And if you come here and if you try to see this cube control, get okay, so you get roles. Okay, there are no rules, right? Now what I'm going to do is I'll publish this. Okay, create a service account. Okay, if you see this, R back. Service account sample unchanged because we didn't change anything. R back. Role based access control authorization NS read only created. Okay, and if you see this within the R back category, a role is created whose name is NS read only. Now, if you try to run this, you will see a role who's this. And if you try to read this, cube control, describe the role, and this role gives access to all the pods. You can also restrict which pod it is. Okay, I'm telling all the pods can get and list. Okay, anyone who uses this can use it. Now what I would like to do is I would like to associate, okay, cube control get SA. I would like to associate, okay, DSCRIV SA. I would like to associate this particular service account, okay, associating this particular service account to this particular role. That means I am assigning this particular role to this service account. Okay, how to do that? Okay, role binding. Associating a role to either a user or a service account is called as role binding. Okay, so either you can assign the role to a user or a service account. So typically we mostly use service account. I created a service account. We are connecting to this using the token associated with the service account. Since the token that we are using belongs to a service account, okay, tokens will be used by service accounts. So it is working. Now what I'm gonna do is role created. Now associate this role to the service account. That's where we have role binding. Cluster role, not really cluster. I'm interested. Role binding. This is what I'm interested about. Let's remove this. Keep in mind, Kubernetes, you cannot use uppercase letters. Done. Okay. Now what you have to do is now. But this is for a user, right? I'm interested about. So what this? Okay, first name of the role, name of the role binding. Always make sure you give unnecessary only. Okay, and it is in the default namespace. And you need to assign it to this particular user. What role? So this is the role that we have created, right? Name of the role. that you have created, and this is the API group. So that means you are associating this particular role to the particular user. Okay, this is called as a role binding, but I'm not interested about user because we are dealing with service accounts. Do you have service accounts? Service accounts. Any examples for service account? Yes. Yeah, subjects kind is service account. Okay. Instead of user, just say service account. And kind name. Kind name service account. Name of the service account is, what is the name of the service account? Sample. Done. Sample. And again, I want to make it clear. We created, by using this, we created a token for a service account. Okay, hope you remember this point, right? Creates a token for the, okay, hope your creates token for the service account sample. And that's the reason you got to know. It's not just token name is sample. It is just like creating a token for the sample service account. All right. Okay. Now subjects kind, subjects is, okay, service account. And the name of the service account is sample. You can also mention if it's possible, namespace, not really needed. That's all, and API group. So what it means is you're assigning the role, okay, sample role, okay. You're assigning this particular role to this sample service account. Okay, I'm not trying to do this. F. Okay, it says role binding and invalid, unsupported value, supported values. Okay, NS read only is invalid. Why? 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 But the role binding is invalid. Okay, read only. NS read only. Maybe supported values. What's wrong? Do you need to mention the namespace? I don't think so. That doesn't make sense. Then why it didn't work? Binding inversion cannot be handled as an on-binding. Example. What's wrong? What's wrong? Okay. Okay. Cube control, get roles hyphen A, right? Okay. Let's try to take something. Any role? Okay, so okay, done. Now I am interested about binding, right? Role binding. Okay. If you look at this role binding metadata, name is there. This is the role reference. Okay. Subjects API group. Mm-hmm. rback.authorizations.kh.io. Kind is user instead of user. I'm using the service account. I don't think it's really even needed namespace. Okay. This is what it is, right? Okay. uh, and that's read only binding. And the namespace is a default. And the role is role reference. The role is a role. Okay. And the name of the role is this. What is the name of the role? NS read only. Done. And the subjects is service account. Okay. KC get SA. The name of the service account is sample. API group kind service account sample. Come on. Okay, come on. The role binding is invalid subjects. Unsupported value. Okay. Kind is equal to service account. Okay, see, this is the role that I have created, right? Now, this is the reference I'm doing. And for this particular, why it won't? Let me try. I think I made a mistake. Okay. Subjects. There is something mistake in this. Do I need to change the order? Mm. Subjects. Done. Role reference. I don't think it works this way. Subjects is invalid. Do I need to say that this is available in default namespace? Ah, um, 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 um. Okay, done. I think something I'm mistaken. Okay, subjects. And API group also you need to have, right? I missed this. Namespace is very simple. It's a default. Let's see how it works. Is invalid subjects 0 API unsupported value. Unsupported value. Ah, okay, let's try with default only. Okay, there's not an issue with the name. Uh, where did I do? Let's try to understand this example. So you're creating a cluster role, and for the cluster role, you're doing a binding subject group. Subjects group is this, right? Just kind. Okay. So if you look at this username, it doesn't exist. Role binding, underside only general subject API unsupported value. Subjects. Subjects unsupported value. Why? Why? let's say, I'll say expense. Objects within the API group, unsupported value. I don't understand. It's a very straightforward thing. What is causing this? Hmm. Okay, we'll park this. Okay, so role binding is coming up with an error. Let's park this backlog. We'll see this tomorrow. I don't want to waste time. Role binding is not happening. We'll see the other aspects as well soon. Next is cluster role that also would get the same issue. I just don't want to drag this. Okay, what I want to do is let's talk about logging meanwhile. Okay, we are also interested about logging, right? So earlier we are not using a managed service. Okay, any questions so far, anyone? Any questions, anyone? Before I proceed further? Okay, all right. So here let's talk about monitoring and logging. So typically, whatever what workloads are doing, what my Cube API server is doing, if I want to see where my pods are scheduled, if I want to know the reason for what is happening down the line after 3 months or 6 months, where logs are being aggregated. Earlier in the project where we have configured our application on the top of the compute VMs, that time we have a free hand to configure things as per our choice. But if you're using manager service, you get most of the things out of the box, okay? Where the logs of the Kubernetes cluster are shipped, okay? So where the logs of the Kubernetes cluster are shipped, okay? So API server, scheduler, controller, okay? Logs can be shipped to a service in AWS called as CloudWatch, okay? And by default, you don't see them enabled. You need to explicitly enable it. Okay, you need to explicitly enable it. And once you enable it, you can view them on CloudWatch. Okay, so for example, you have created the Kubernetes cluster, right? Go here and select the cluster. And if you look at this option, access networking observability, yeah. And if you look at this, there is nothing. Okay, if you see this, the logs of the API server. You know what is an API server, which is the heart brain of the Kubernetes. Okay, auditing logs. Okay, what's happening in the system? Who is connecting? Whose access is denied? Who is doing what? And controller manager, what your deployment controller is doing, what your replica set controller is doing, what your stateful set is doing. And scheduler. This is very much important. If something is not being scheduled, if something is not working, you get most of the information here. And authentication related information is coming up here. But if you want to enable it, you can just come here and enable it. But I don't want to do it through manual approach. Okay, I want to do through the code. And if you enable this, where can you see the logs is CloudWatch. Okay, CloudWatch is again a service that is an observability solution on the top of Kubernetes, where you can monitor the resources and the applications that are running underneath that. So you can also ship your Linux system logs that are running on the cloud to here. Okay, you can also do that. So here there is a concept called as logs, and inside the logs you need to create a group. Okay, right now these many are something we have, and if you don't whenever you create a log group, you also need to mention the expiry interval. If you don't mention the expiry interval, they'll be here forever. Okay, so let me delete my other entries. Okay, so when you go to the log groups, where you can group a set of entities. Okay, so you can create a log group and you can mention the name of the log group, and you can define the expiration interval. Okay, whatever the logs comes up as per the organization policy, I want to keep it. And you can also mention what is the class of the logs. Okay, so standard is a type of class, or if your logs are very infrequently, so for example, I want to store the logs but my team don't access it frequently, then you can go through infrequently access, so that it will be stored on the top of some not expensive storage. And you can also encrypt your storage by supplying the key. But I don't want to do it manually. Okay, so when you enable the logs, by default it creates a group. I think it should, but let me see. Okay, let me see whether it enables through code or not. uh, AWS, AKS, Terraform. Mm, okay, by the way, let me show you where you can find it. Okay, AWS AKS logs. Yeah, here is what it is. Okay, API server, your cluster's API server is nothing but your control plane component that exposes your API. If you enable the API server logs when you launch the cluster, or shortly thereafter, the logs include API server. That's where you use it to start the API server. Okay. Auditing logs. Okay, audit the logs, provide what each and every user is doing, what admin is doing, what system components are doing that have affected your cluster. And authenticator is like who is authenticating to the cluster. I mean, who gets token. Okay, who is doing what with respect to what they are supposed to. Okay, so that can be done. Controller manager. Okay, I already told you how things are being shipped. Okay, who is scheduling, who which controller is doing what. This is a very important thing, scheduler. So if you want to know what's happening, who is scheduling, okay, which parts are not being scheduled, if something doesn't work, scheduler logs are very important. Okay, these are very important. And yeah, let's try to enable it. Mm, I'm not sure how to enable it. I think log something. Yeah, enable control plane logging. Yeah, here is how it is. Within the cluster, you need to say this. Okay, all right. It's pretty straightforward. Go here. You need to come here and you need to say this. What are logs you are interested? Okay. What are logs you're interested? You can mention what logs are needed. I am interested only about audit logs. Okay, I just want to see what's going on. Okay, so I'm interested only about this audit, but based on your need, you can also define. Okay, let's try to publish it. cd2 EKS and bash create.sh. So I think it's just update that parameter. If you see this, these options are not enabled on your EKS. I think I've shown you. Okay, nothing is enabled, but I have enabled audit through code. You see this perfect. So this is the only option. Tilde symbol is nothing but a change. And what is a change? Audit logs are going to be enabled. Want to change, and it's gonna sleep for 10 seconds. Let it run. Okay, that, and again, it should be fairly quick. Okay, perfect. It's already changed. Now you go here and try to make a refresh. You should be able to see that this got enabled. Now, if you go to the CloudWatch again, it's a monitoring solution where you can see all your cloud resources in a single shot. Okay, it's a monitoring resource manager where you can monitor your resources. And if you come here and if you take a log groups, you should be able to see perfect. Can you see this? So this log group is created. See, this is mainly, for example, if you have 10 clusters, you can see the logs of the cluster of your choice. Okay, it's a grouping the logs of the resources. Okay, so come here, you can see what are the logs that it is being captured. So if you see these two logs are generated, now just select this. You should be able to stream the logs, and you can also mention how long you want these logs. I want from last 30 minutes or 1 minute. You can just mention, and you can also search things. Okay, so that you really don't have to go and see what's going on. And okay, and another important thing, this log group retention is never expiring, which is a very bad thing. Okay, so how to change it? Guys, again, I need to take a hard pause in 2 minutes. But yes, let me show you real quick. Mm, we have anything retention, right? So here we are talking about retention. Retention defines how long the logs need to stay. Okay, so the retention option. Yeah. So log watch group. Defines the retention for the enabled logs on CloudWatch. If you don't enable this, the logs will be there forever. Okay. What is the name of a cluster? The name of our cluster is B58-EKS. Okay. For now, I'll just keep it as 1 day, which is not realistic, I know. But for now, let's try to keep it. Okay. So let it come. And you'll see a resource getting created for log retention. Okay, it's just a property manager. I think it won't work. It works, okay. I don't think it works. We need to mention the log group. Ah, okay, perfect. It worked. Now you go here and try to make a refresh. Right now, the logs are never expiring. Right now, you see the logs are going to be expired in 1 day. So whatever the logs that are created in the past, you cannot change it. But the logs that are created, you can change it. Okay, you come here and you can see the logs of it. Okay, clear, guys? So this is not the right way to do it. So let's delete both of it. Okay, this is how it works. Now you'd see a drift because Terraform has created a resource that was deleted by you. So there will be a drift saying that, oh, okay, in the code it says this is what it is, but I don't see the resource. Now it should be a drift. Now, yeah, let's see. Okay, perfect. Now this is going to be applied for that. Okay. So that means you're telling, okay, the log group that I'm creating is for the V58 Kubernetes cluster. Earlier, I just said some random name. Okay. This is how you can define. Once you learn Kubernetes, all you should know is how to deal manually. That's it. Once you deal manually, you can create it. Again, there is some issue creating cloud one operation. Yeah, because the specified log already exists. Okay. Okay, that's fine. We enabled it, right? We'll see it tomorrow. Okay, I'll just comment it. Publish.
Sir, I
Bash.
have small question.
Please go ahead.
What
We'll
are the
enable it tomorrow.
strategies are used in deployment, sir?
We'll see that when time comes. Okay. We have to learn CI/CD, continuous integration and continuous deployment. That time we'll see the Git strategy, Git branching strategy, and the deployment strategy as well. At that time, it will be more low level, but we can go with either rolling update strategy or blue-green strategy. Okay. Or we can also use a canary-based strategy. Okay, if you remember, we have seen in Kubernetes rolling update, recreate, blue-green, if you remember. You remember? We were talking about it. You saw this here? So rolling update. One version will be gone, new version will be coming, one version will be gone, new version will be coming up. Blue-green. All whatever you create, everything will be created together in a shot. And you just point them back to the other one. And another is recreate strategy. Destroy all the old one, create a brand new one. Remember before
Yeah.
Kubernetes stateful set we were talking? Okay, any questions, anyone? I just need to take a hard pause today. Today, anyway, we thought of not taking session due to the limited audience, but I'm glad people have shown up. I really appreciate that. So yeah, that's it, guys. Any questions, anyone? Any questions, anyone? Questions? Is it interesting, guys? Okay. All right. Thank you. We'll see you tomorrow. Thank you then. Bye-bye.